All right, everybody, welcome back. We are so happy to be joined today by Dr. Lester Grinspoon. He's an Associate Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School, and, of course, a well-known figure in marijuana activism. He started his look at marijuana in the 1960s with the book Marijuana Reconsidered, also followed by Psychedelic Drugs Reconsidered, Marijuana the Forbidden Medicine, and Psychedelic Reflections. Dr. Grinspoon, thank you so much for joining us on NORML Show Live.
My pleasure.
Well, I wanted to bring you here on the show today because, of course, you've been involved with medical marijuana and the movement and the studies involving that have pushed it to a greater political understanding than it ever has been before. We're up to now 16 states in the District of Columbia that have some form of legislation that recognizes the medicinal uses of cannabis. Giving this long look over the past 4 or 5 decades, what do you see in the development of medical marijuana that pleases you, and are there any developments that have you concerned?
Well, it pleases me immensely because, as you mentioned, I started to work on marijuana coming from a position that it was a terribly dangerous drug, and I wanted people to take the government seriously when they said that. So I had some unscheduled time, went into the Countway Library. And the final point, that in 1971, it came out as a book, Marijuana Reconsidered. Now, the person who had to reconsider was me, because I discovered that just about like everybody else in the country, I had been brainwashed. And I came to the conclusion that not only that it didn't make any sense to say that marijuana should be prohibited, because, in fact, the most dangerous thing about the prohibition was the fact that we were arresting about 300,000 people at that time. Now it's up to somewhere between 800 and 900,000, depending on what recent year you look at. That was the danger. But the danger didn't reside in any inherent psychopharmacological property of the drug, but the way we as a society were treating it. Now, at that time, I just understood marijuana as a recreational drug. My best friend, Carl Sagan, smoked it a lot. And when I would tell him as his friend, the physician, his closest friend, a physician, you shouldn't do this, Carl. It's going to be it's terrible for your health. And, of course, Carl would, and then he'd say, what about him? He never took it seriously.
I'm just so jealous every time I hear you speak of Carl Sagan, because as a little kid, I was in all of these gifted and talented programs, and I took astronomy and such. And I think I was 12 years old when Dr. Sagan's Cosmos program was on PBS. It just captivated my imagination. And
in the imagination of people around the world.
Yeah, and to find out later in life, when I get involved with marijuana law reform, to find out that he was a fellow traveler of the road and, thought many of the same things I think about this amazing plant. I'm always jealous every time you talk about him.
Well, he was very interesting because, when they'd come to town, once his picture was on Time magazine, there was no eating in a public dining room because, it was awful. In that sense, that I understood what real celebrities had to deal with. Well, anyway, so we used to smoke in their suite or out here at my house or something. But one night we had dinner in town, and someone had people sent me little gifts of cannabis. Some of the first Sensimilla. You remember that? That was a long time ago. And I tried it, and I thought, great. Well, when we had dinner, I said to Carl, I got these from California. This new Sensimilla. Don't have to worry about food. And we tried it. I had a wonderful time. And then as we were saying goodbye that night, he said to me, Lester, I see you've got one more of those joints. I have to finish this last chapter. I forget for which book. It would be so helpful to me. This is so great. This would be so helpful to me. Could I possibly ask you, he's very polite, could I possibly ask you to give that to me for a time? But that's a measure of, of how much he felt it did for his work. I mean, in so many words. And it's also, he's a one-man refutation for anybody who thinks it compromises your work ethic. I mean, Carl was the hardest working person I've ever met in my life. And he was a pot smoker.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at any rate, to go on with it. So, originally I thought it was just a recreational drug, although in Marijuana Reconsidered, I had reviewed the literature from the 19th century, which was brought to my attention through reading Todd McNaria's book.
Sure.
And so I knew there was a 19th century. They didn't smoke it, of course, but there was a 19th century use of it. But I didn't think much, it was a liquid. It was hard to dispense. We didn't have bioassays in the 19th century. You didn't know how much of the stuff was in it. Fortunately, those doctors didn't have to worry about serious side effects. And so the problem was not so much overdosing as underdosing when you have to take it orally, or, indeed the same thing is true with sativas. But I didn't take it too seriously as a medicine until I had a personal experience, which I'm sure by now you know about, my son having acute lymphocytic leukemia and what it did for him. And that really opened my eyes. And I said, how many other children are going through this unnecessarily, this pernicious nausea and vomiting?
Well, this is a very important topic that we interview a lot of people about. We've interviewed Miko Hester Perez and other parents who are using cannabis to help treat childhood autism and other, epilepsy and other disorders. And here you were doing this back in the 1960s. Was there a lot of blowback, a lot of controversy involved in that?
Oh, there sure was.
Yeah.
But not from the people who were treating Danny. I mean, in fact, it came about because I was invited, when he got sick, Sidney Farber, who when I was a student at Harvard Medical was my professor of oncology. And when Danny got sick, I went to him and asked him if he would take care of Danny. And of course he did. Now, when he retired, a new man was selected for the post, and he was from Houston, Texas. And I was invited by a common friend to have dinner with him. And at dinner, he said he knew about, I didn't know how much of Marijuana Reconsidered he had read, but he read the chapter on medicine. He talked about that, and he said to me, I wonder if that would be useful for the nausea and vomiting of chemotherapy. And I said, well, of course, chemotherapeutics weren't invented then. There's no way of knowing, but it certainly is a good anti-nausea. And on the way home in the car, my wife, Betsy, said, shouldn't we get some marijuana for Danny? And I could believe, but I said, no, it's illegal. And mind you, I'd never used it. I'd never, at this time, I said, no, it's illegal, and we don't want to compromise the people at the Children's Hospital taking care of them. Well, the next time I went, my office was right next to the Children's Hospital. I'd meet Betsy and Danny when he'd come in for his chemotherapy. And usually when I walked into that room, his face was just ashen with anxiety. And Betsy was communicated to her, and very shortly I'd be looking the same way. And this time I came in, I said, what's going on? They were joking. They were having a joke on me. And so while we were, I said, hey, come on, let me in on it. They finally did. Betsy had gone out to the, you know the story, so well, just for your audience case, went up to the Wellesley High School parking lot, asked his friend to get a little bit of marijuana for her once he overcame his absolute amazement. Mrs. Grinspoon wanted a little marijuana. He came back, and the point is they smoked it out. Not she, because both of us were marijuana virgins, but he had obviously had some experience with it. He smoked out in the parking lot. And he got on the gurney that day, had the injection. Usually he got sick almost right away, and it was a race to get him home before he vomited in the car. He gets off the gurney and he says, "Hey, Mom, I noticed there's a sub shop on Brookline Avenue. Can we stop and get a sub?" And when he got home, he didn't want to go home. He wanted to go back to school. And from that time on, because we never had to suffer the greatest discomfort he had in that illness was the anxiety, the anticipatory anxiety of and the nausea and vomiting itself. And I started to think about that. And then in 1993, Jake Backlar and I wrote the first edition of Marijuana, and then in 97 it came out, the larger edition. Now, so it's clear I'd gone from believing it was good very good as a recreational drug, and I was beginning to learn what an enormously important medicine it was going to be. Mm-hmm. That it would be, as I said then, eventually considered the wonder drug of our times. And then it was only, I started to smoke a year or two later, and I've been smoking ever since. I started at age 44, and I'm 83 now. And it's been a boon for me in terms of as a medicine, but it's also I've been very impressed with just what I observed in Carl Sagan. It can be an enhancer of ideas. Mm-hmm. I decided that this thing can help. It's not just ideas, but it can enhance a number of human capabilities. Not for everybody, but in fact, I have a website devoted to trying to help people to learn something from people who have found that it can be used as an enhancer. I find that I should say enhancement spiritual, because I think it's a whole area there. And I don't want to leave out the capacity for spirituality that it can help with. But at any rate, so now I think there are three broad areas of its usefulness. So but you asked me over the years, starting again with the publication of Marijuana Reconsidered, to get back to Carl, he and I used to read each other's manuscripts. And he read the manuscript for Marijuana Reconsidered. And he said to me, I really like the book, Lester, but you made one big mistake. I said, "What was that?" You said the prohibition would be gone within 10 years. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, "It's going to be gone within 2-3 years at the most."
Oh, my.
So as a prognosticator, I'm not very good.
This may be the only calculation that Carl Sagan ever messed up.
But so it's been, a strange experience. I mean, once I got to see what I learned about medical marijuana, especially as more patients got in touch with it, I got more and more experience. I decided to devote, most of my time, once I became emeritus, to this very issue. Mm. Now, I'm glad that, needless to say, that marijuana as a medicine is becoming greatly, it's turning out to be a wonderful event. More and more people are learning about it, and we're learning about more and more symptoms and syndromes for which it is useful, and we're learning which cannabinoids and which terpenes and so forth may be. We're on the threshold of learning more than that we can do more than just say, get harlequin because there are approximately equal parts of cannabidiol and THC. We're learning about the other cannabinoids We're learning more about the terp and how to now collect data about, which combination or ratios are best, not only for a particular symptom or syndrome, but also for a particular person. I mean, people differ. And so we're going to be able to do this if we can make the whole medical marijuana thing grow and not fall under the heels of big pharma, which is working very hard to be able to get something equivalent to the liquid marijuana that is known as sativix. That is, if they can get it into a little white pill form, they'll get it through the FDA. And then that worries me because those people then put a lot of effort into sustaining the prohibition.
Sure.
Because they're not going to sell their things unless the prohibition stands.
Well, that's something I did want to ask you about this, what I see and have commented on as an oncoming pharmaceuticalization of cannabis. We have all these companies that are trying to, we have patents on different cannabinoids. We have, GW Pharmaceuticals working on Sativex and so forth. And a lot of these manufacturers, when they bring up the benefits of how they would distribute this medicine, they point out that they would have, they'd guarantees of potency, purity, we'd know what dosage you're getting, etc. But one of the things they often tout is it wouldn't get you that high, as if that's something that's medically bad. What about the medical utility of the high?
Yeah, exactly. I was so amused. I met Jeffrey Guy, who formed GW Pharmaceuticals, years ago in a conference in Cologne. And we got to know each other and a little bit. And he told me about, he had now, apparently he knew one of the premiers, I think, I can't remember, but got him an appointment with the Home Secretary. And he had persuaded the Home Secretary that he could produce a marijuana medicine that would completely negate the two dangerous properties of it. What were they? Getting high and lung damage. And, I thought, wow, getting high. The Home Secretary went for it. And, of course, they do that by putting a lot of CBD in their liquid marijuana. It's just anybody can do it. Just get some harlequin, you can do the same thing. But at any rate, and it was then that I first used the word pharmaceuticalization, because I hadn't really thought about, the pharmaceutical company might move into this. And now, of course, they're moving millions of dollars into it. And, of course, not long ago, probably almost a year ago now, the DEA, I think it was, published in the Federal Register that it's not only that they moved, first in 1985 when they synthesized dronabinol, that was supposed to answer critics like me. We now have a marijuana medicine. It's dronabinol. Or what's it called, Marinol.
Right.
And you don't have to push for medical marijuana anymore. Well, of course, you know what happened with Marinol. It's summarized in my little experience with it. That is, in the experience I've had with people who have used it as a medicine and have also had the experience of using smoked or inhaled vaporized marijuana. They much prefer the latter to the sativix. Why do they use sativix? It's legal in the countries they're in, and it soon will be here. And the same with dronabinol, Marinol. It's legal. And, of course, because it wasn't selling, the federals, when a drug company produces a new drug, it costs a lot of money. The developmental money is put up by the drug company because they're pretty sure they're not going to take a chance unless when they get the 20-year patent rights, when it's approved, they can charge whatever they want. And the dronabinol, certainly sold, but not as much as, and it didn't take the place of it didn't suppress the clamoring for medical marijuana. So the government moved it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. Now it's the same 21 carbon molecule as the one that's in natural marijuana, but this one could be in Schedule 2, and then some years later they moved it to Schedule 3. I mean, speak of the hypocrisy of it. That's so. Now, the guy in this thing that appeared in the Federal Register, the DEA is talking about giving permission for the drug companies to take any moiety, any part of the naturally grown thing, and put it into a pharmaceutical product, and it'll be in a schedule that will allow it to be sold, like 3 or 4 or what have you. So, then I really became worried about pharmaceuticalization, because then those guys are going to have, a lot of what people can have for themselves if they just get somebody or get access to strains that have the particular ratios of the things they need. For most things, you can just go out and buy some marijuana and it will deal with your Crohn's disease. But there may be better approaches to it that allow you to take less. If you don't like to get high because you have to take it when you work and so forth, you can take a large dose of CBD. It could have a high CBD to THC ratio and so forth and so on. All these things. In other words, I remember saying before that the drug companies won't finally be successful because ultimately the gold standard, which is vaporized or smoked or even ingested marijuana, is the gold standard. And unless they can beat the gold standard and also compete price-wise with plain marijuana, with just the dope you and I are acquainted with, they're not going to succeed. Mm-hmm. So it worries me now, and there are some things about the way medical marijuana is going that disturb me. When the book first came out, that book, I remember the first letter, I got a letter with regard to marijuana reconsidered. And the first letter, I can remember every word of it, was just one sentence with a semicolon. You dirty Harvard doctor, you did it because you wanted to make money. No salutation, no signature. And then, now the first email I got about marijuana, the forbidden medicine, it was longer, I can't remember, but the gist was that I was being so very Machiavellian, that I had written this book so it would act as the Trojan horse to get what I really wanted, which is the end of prohibition. And, I laughed at that as we are now, but the fact of the matter is, the Gallup poll is now up to 50% in this country, and that was a few months ago. It's going up exponentially, apparently. Yeah. We're going to get this defeat of prohibition. But in the meantime, it worries me that, there are some people in the industry, I think, who are going to see that without the prohibition, they're going to be in the same position as these pharmaceutical companies if they develop it. It reminds me of just after Marijuana Reconsidered came out, within a year or two, I was asked to give a talk in Toronto on it. And it just so happens that Carl was also going to give a talk that week. So we and our wives went up to Toronto together. And because there was some coverage of what I was going to, it was in the newspaper. And because it was in the newspaper, one of the young men who went to Toronto because they would not allow themselves to be drafted for the Vietnam War, there was a large group of them. They were renting a house. Some of them slept there and paid it, but it was a kind of clubhouse. It gave them a sense of community. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they said to me, Dr. Grinspoon, we love what you're trying to do. It's so important to defeat this prohibition. but we sure hope you won't succeed until we're out of the woods. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we can't get green cards or whatever the equivalent of here. And the only thing we can do to keep ourselves going is to sell dope. And we'll be out of business if you're successful. Well, you see, I think that to some extent, there's some of that going on now because it's so successful. And that worries me because, you see, I see this as truly the people's medicine. The people discovered it. You know how I learned about it first? I saw letters in magazines. In fact, I remember, I think it was I remember getting that issue of Playboy that you won't remember, you weren't even born, that had that wonderful interview of Fidel Castro. and I saw a letter or two there, and then I started to find letters. I said, hey, how? And then I started to get into it, and then of course along comes Danny, and I said I really got to make a more systematic study of this. But at any rate, pharmaceuticalization is something I worry about, and in a sense, it's mirror image in the medical marijuana industry.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit.
I don't want to get into the trouble Alan did. I want to make clear, I'm not talking about medical marijuana. I'm talking about the industry, and not all of the industry. I'm talking about some of the industry and the possibilities. If this is the way we're going to distribute marijuana as a medicine, I see it as fraught with a lot of dangers for people in general who want to use marijuana. My view is anybody who wants to use it should be able to use it. If he wants to use it to go dancing, or if he wants to use it to stop a migraine headache, or because he wants to try and write a poem or something, that's his choice. And I say that quite comfortably because it is a truly remarkable medicine. It's safe. We don't have to worry about it. Right. Now, that doesn't mean it shouldn't be regulated. We don't want children using it unless they've got some kinds of illness. And we don't want people doing other things that are irresponsible, whether it be driving or flying or whatever it is. They have to use it responsibly or be held responsible for the irresponsibilities of it. And, of course, there's always the fact that there are some people who will abuse it. That is, people, particularly people who, in my view, haven't quite figured out what they want to do with their lives. They get doped all the time, and they use it as a way of preventing doing the kind of thinking they have to do. Now, I feel I'm giving you a sermon, Russ, but you already know.
Well, let me get into that just a little bit, because you bring up some topics that I had on my list to discuss, and we were talking about the medical marijuana industry and our seemingly inevitable move to the end of prohibition. But there's a lot of discussion now about the proper path to take to get there. And one major proponent was Stephen D'Angelo. He runs the Harborside Health Center, the largest medical marijuana dispensary in California, in the world for that matter. And he had that show Weed Wars, which is just on the Discovery Channel. And he took a lot of heat because of his stance that he reiterated on a couple of cable shows as well, where he says all adults should be able to use it for purposes of wellness. It's kind of a variation on the Dennis Perone, all use is medical.
All use is medical.
And then he also was quoted as saying, I don't support the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes, something we've said recreation many times. Do you see any danger or have any comments about those concepts, this all use is medical, all use is wellness, don't legalize for recreational use?
Well, I think it relates to what I just said about this. I find that amazing that anybody who is acquainted with marijuana would make those comments. First of all, all use is wellness. That's pretty sappy in my view, because it's just like, all use of marijuana is medicinal or what have you. And that doesn't ring. That's just a kind of way of dismissing that all use is not medical, and it also demeans its medical usefulness. All use is medical, and in fact, the way such places as California are using it, I have no problem if someone in Los Angeles or San Francisco, what have you, anywhere in California, goes to a doctor, says, "Oh, I have a backache," and this is a doctor who is more interested in getting a fee for giving a marijuana card than the patient and his problem. He doesn't examine the patient. He may do a cursory examination, which in some cases you can be sure you're not overlooking something. But it's clearly just to get a card. And then that person, who is not, in my view, even if he sometimes has a backache, like most of us do, he's not really using it for medicinal purposes. He didn't go there to use it for. But as far as I'm concerned, whatever he's using it for is fine. But I don't want him to have to go through this deception of getting a card so that he can use his marijuana without hassle and legally. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, I think that demeans medicine. That there are physicians who will do that embarrasses me. So I don't buy that at all. And I see D'Angelo's position. I mean, it may not, I don't know the man at all. But those statements suggest to me that he's probably earning a lot of money on this. And, don't rock my boat. He's putting his interest ahead of what the general interest is. Mm-hmm. And this is a general interest. I think that it goes against medical marijuana, what he's saying, because, you can't expect that every other state is going to be like California. That is, make it possible. Really, we're just saying it like it is. It's possible in California. If you want to use grass and you just go in there, you can find a doctor who will, you tell him you have a hangnail and he'll give you a card. Now, the other states are like, you take a state like New Jersey. These other states are being and they always say because of what's happening in California. And that means, well, we don't want people to use it for other than medical, and the way we define medical conditions, we the people, the legislators define it. So they arrogate to themselves the right to say only debilitating, what the hell's a debilitating, and they define the debilitating. But, debilitating is such a broad word. And then they go into, multiple sclerosis, and they'll give a half a dozen things, and those are the things. Well, that doesn't do it as a medicine. I mean, that contradicts what marijuana is a medicine.
If I may interrupt real quickly, isn't it true, Doctor, that with other medicines, other pharmaceuticals, that they are prescribed off-label all the time for things that they've never been tested for?
Absolutely. Let's take aspirin, for example. You can go and buy aspirin as much as you want, take as much, because we have trust in you. You're not going to take so many that you're going to harm yourself. That's not the point. We don't think, there are suicidal people out there who can do it. You can do it with aspirin. But you can buy aspirin, even though, because we consider aspirin safe, even though more than 1,000, maybe up to 2,000 people a year die from aspirin in this country. Now, marijuana should be as available, like aspirin, to anybody to use it for any reason. Mm-hmm. And there aren't going to be 1,000 to 2,000 deaths from the availability of marijuana for any reason. And you don't specify, it shouldn't be specified. If I want to use it as a medicine, as I do, I know exactly, I happen to know, because I've studied this, exactly what I need. I need a high cannabinoid level drug. And I, in a future time, can buy marijuana at a place that makes medicines that are labeled with the various constituents, the ratios, and so forth and so on. But but if I don't like what these people are charging for the medicine I get just because I want to get high once in a while, I can always grow it myself. That's the final defense against both the pharmaceutical companies and the government. I can grow it myself. Mm-hmm. And I think, and furthermore, there will be, in this kind of an environment, there will not only be places where you can buy, marijuana, but there will be places where you can get more exotic marijuanas. Like, I'd like to try the one Dr. Grinspoon, but I can't get it.
You still haven't gotten any Dr. Grinspoon, Dr. Grinspoon?
I'd like to try it, but that's just curiosity. But the point is, there will be places that will do that for you and so forth. And then there will be the people who specialize in medical, and they'll provide, something like the kinds of things that there are some laboratories in California now doing. They're looking into, they're not only ruling out fungi, which are pretty rare, and insecticides, but you can buy a very safe one, and it has exactly what you want for a medicine. These are different prices, but it's a free market. But it's different. Nobody's going to shield them because it's prohibited for people to buy it unless you're going to do it medicine so they can charge a lot. It's going to be strictly whoever can compete best, that will be the price. And you can have the best price yourself by just growing yourself. I would never do that. I'm too lazy. But nevertheless, it will be much less expensive than it is now in the street. Mm-hmm. And that's the way ultimately, all this fussing that's going on about medical marijuana, take a state like New Jersey, which I saw originally what they decided they would allow it for. Well, that means that maybe 10% of people who could really make use of this wonderful medicine are only going to have the legal right, let's say if they adopt that finally, in New Jersey, and certainly not in the federal government, to use it. That's silly. I, as a patient, want to make that decision. Mm-hmm. If I'm smart, I'll make it with a physician like Jeffrey Hergenrather in California, or one of the other physicians who's serious about this and knows something about it. He'll help me figure out which is the best marijuana to use for that. Mm-hmm. But that's the way it ultimately has to be.
We're speaking with Dr. Lester Grinspoon, Harvard Emeritus, and the author of Marijuana Reconsidered and Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine. And Dr. Grinspoon, we've talked about the need for the end of prohibition, recreational use, all uses wellness, all these different concepts. And I've been theorizing that we're kind of at a tipping point here. We've seen the polls for legalization, like you said, raised to 50% now. But I also see, I kind of sense that some people have had a shall we say, a Judge Judy, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining moment with medical, and this is reflected in some of Alan's comments that were taken a little out of context. And you referred to some of the, what would be called farces of doctors that don't care and just trying to get a card. And so I have theorized that we're at a tipping point now where if we don't get legalization and soon, we might get pushback, on medical that makes things worse, where people think, well, we gave you an inch, you took a mile, it turned out bad for whatever reason, so now let's restrict it even further. Do you think that the legalization now is the only way to move forward on medical, or can we continue to make strides in medical legislation without full legalization?
No, I think we've got to do it now. We've got to do it soon before you see, there are 16 states in the District of Columbia that presumably have medical marijuana. As far as I'm concerned, these are a whole bunch of different social experiments. And I think we're far enough along, we've got enough data to say this isn't going to work. You can't take something that is as safe, as toxicity-free as marijuana, that does as many things for people as marijuana, that can be obtained very inexpensively if you get away from the what I call the prohibition tariff. That there's no going back on that in the time of the internet and rapid communications. Marijuana is here to stay. The door has been opened. It's out there. So there may be more attempts to repress it if there is a backlash, as you say. I don't think it's going to happen for a number of reasons. As I say, once you have, like me, once I discovered that I was wrong, there's no way of telling me, you know, I'm there, and I will continue to use it illegally if I have to. And I think most people will take that view. You cannot turn back the pages of this thing. We are on the way to prohibition, we are on the way out of prohibition, and it can't be stopped. Now, there'll be more efforts, but, you know, I try to tell myself along all these years waiting for anything to happen, you know, I said, well, look how long alcohol prohibition lasted. Long before, but once it caught, I mean, who in 1931 would have predicted the end of the Volstead Act in 1933?
In fact, there was what was the famous quote from one of the legislators? The chances of the Volstead Act being repealed were the same as a hummingbird flying to the moon with the Washington Monument tied to its tail.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So and I think we're getting to that point where people are going to say, you know, just as in a microcosm of it, people who have seen their a relative or a friend or an acquaintance use marijuana, this is people who have never used it before, and they say, hey, I thought this was a terribly dangerous, what's all the fuss? And they begin to reconsider. Marijuana medicine has opened the door, the floodgates, and it cannot be closed. But I'm not just talking about it as medicine. They're seeing that these awful toxicity. I mean, look at in California alone. Now, we know there's more marijuana smoking going on in California than any other state. We also know that the driving fatalities are significantly down. They're going down faster than the rest of the nation. We also know that the life expectancy has not fallen. We also know that there's no increase in serious mental diseases like schizophrenia. I mean, you know, we're talking about, that was 1996, right. 96, right? We're talking about a few years now. So that it's almost tempted, I'm almost tempted to say, you know, if as many people used it around the country as do in California, and these data are right, we should all be, we should try and get as many people on it as possible, you know.
The data are in.
The data are in, but I don't think this is the right way to do it. I don't think it should be you see, first of all, it's a special medicine. Because I've never come across a medicine where you cannot identify a death from overdose anywhere. I mean, people have searched, the government has searched the world literature, you can be sure with it. You just can't find it.
Yeah.
So, you know, my attitude has been with people I can't examine because they're in another country. And I would say, I remember early in learning about inflammatory bowel, whether it was useful in inflammatory bowel disease. And I would say, people, you know, I don't know. I don't have enough data on that. But if it were me, I would try it.
Why not?
Because I know, but if I were just an ordinary patient and never tried it before, I said, or I could put it, if I were you, I believe you might try it because it may not do a thing for you, but there are some peripheral things that make things about it that make me think there's a chance, and try it. It's not going to hurt you. Whatever else, you know, it's not going to hurt you. So, I think that, you know, all this business about medicine, the way the medical field is holding it, we need large double-blind studies. Mm-hmm. Well, And you see, I'm grateful to GW Pharmaceuticals, who's putting out that liquid cannabis called Sativex. But they did multiple sclerosis first, double-blind studies. Yes, it helps multiple sclerosis, something we told them years ago.
Yeah.
And now they're going through other ones that we, who have collected all this anecdotal evidence and paid, yeah, we can tell you right now that it's going to be useful for the treatment of or whatever it is they're going to. Everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. But they think that only, and they're right, it can only be had legally if you go through this, the FDA or the equivalent in Britain of the seal of approval, or any country, only then can you use it legally. Mm-hmm. But once the prohibition is off, I would say that it doesn't count as a medicine in the usual way. Drugstores don't have to, pharmacy doesn't have to get into that at all. If you, the patient, have heard that it may be, you can try it, as long as people don't, on the other hand, it can go too far, like this guy from Canada, what's his name, who makes hashish oil and says
Rick Simpson.
Rick, what's his last name? Simpson, yeah. I think he's Australian now. He wrote a nasty piece about some of the. But you see, I worry about that because not that it isn't useful in cancer, but to say it cures cancer, that may be true sometime in the future. Where cancer is an enormously complicated, many diseases. And the risk of saying that it cures cancer is, for my part, I've never gotten a biopsy before and after, like Bob Mellamy keeps trying to tell me it's a cancer cure. Send me the biopsy material, Bob. Never has. The worry about that is, if you've got a cancer, and nowadays we can cure many, we can't cure all of them, for sure, but we can do a lot to retard them. That is allopathic medicine. It can be used with allopathic medicine for, the nausea, vomiting, appetite, all the symptoms that come along with it. But we can't say cure. Now, I just use cancer as an illustration. It could be oversold, but the only dangerous ways that I can think of that could be oversold is if they don't get good medical advice. Any good physician would tell them there is no evidence now that it will cure any cancer. It can apparently really put pressure on the cancer, maybe retard the growth, but there's no evidence of that. And that to me is oversold because it puts people's lives in jeopardy if they say, oh, I'm going to cure it with Rick Simpson's oil, and I don't have to or follow their advice that I need radiation and chemotherapy, whatever it is. That's the problem there. Mm-hmm. But relative to the kinds of problems that will exist if we don't end this prohibition, that's a small one that can be dealt with easily.
Right. Well, Dr. Grinspoon, you've been incredibly generous with your time, and I wanted to wrap up by taking a trip off the path of marijuana for a second, because a couple of your other books, Psychedelic Drugs Reconsidered and Psychedelic Reflections, deal with those type of substances, and I'm wondering in the future if we might start to see more medical psilocybin, medical acid, medical ecstasy, and so forth.
No question, we will. Already there are people at NYU who are doing serious psychedelic research. And of course, Rick Doblin is carrying out this research with MDMA and PTSD. So that's happening already. I don't think that the psychedelics, I think there are many uses to the psychedelics which are being ignored for the same reason marijuana has been ignored, but it will never approach marijuana in sense of scale of what it can do. But certainly, psychedelic drugs are going to come back. Come back and achieve a real status for research when it lost in the mid-'60s when when it was closed down by the DEA. The production of LSD was closed down.
Right.
It will come back. No question about it.
All right. Well, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, Harvard Emeritus, author of the Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine, Marijuana Reconsidered. I want you all to check out his websites as well. There's a couple. Marijuana, the Forbidden the Forbidden Website. Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine.
No, there's your unconscious working overtime.
I guess so. Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine website is at rxmarijuana.com, and Uses of Marijuana website, marijuana-uses.com. And that's where the Dr. X essay is from Carl Sagan as well?
The Dr. X essay, after his death, I put it up on the marijuana use website, and it will be found there. And people can comment on these websites and share on the various writings. But it's marijuana-uses.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, for joining us here on NORML Show Live.
It's been a pleasure, Russ.